Jimin breaks down after learning Jungkook was once slapped by his own father during early BTS training. What else has been hidden all these years? Who told you you were special, huh? The slap echoed louder than the trainer's whistle. Jungkook didn't flinch. But 12-year-old Jimin, hiding behind a stack of unused speakers in the HYBE practice studio, did. The memory had come out of nowhere. Now, 10 years later, Jimin stood in the same studio, older, sharper, weary from tour rehearsals. His arms fell limp at his sides, his face pale as his eyes met Jungkook's across the room. The youngest member was adjusting his in-ear monitors, laughing softly with taehyung, completely unaware. Jimin's breath hitched. It had started with a late-night conversation in the producer's booth. "You were here early, huh?" Bang Si-hyuk had asked him offhandedly, sipping on barley tea as they both watched old training footage. It was part of a documentary planning session, content for their anniversary project. "Yeah, I used to sneak in, watch the older trainees. I just wanted to learn." Bang PD had smiled. "You were always that type. But you missed things too." He paused the video. On screen, a younger Jungkook, barely 14, stood tense, facing a tall man in a black coat. Jimin's brow furrowed. "Who's that?" he asked. Bang PD's eyes dropped to his cup. His father. That day was difficult. Jimin pressed play, and then he saw it. The man leaned in, said something inaudible, but the next second, the sound cut back in with a sharp crack. Jungkook's cheek turned red instantly. His shoulders stiffened, but his expression didn't change. Jimin froze. Back in the present, rehearsal buzzed around him, but the sound in Jimin's head was nothing but white noise. "Hey, Hyung." Jungkook jogged over, holding a bottle of Pocari Sweat. "You okay?" Jimin's lips trembled. He hadn't meant to say it. "Why didn't you tell me your father hit you?" The room fell silent. Even the background music paused, almost as if the studio itself knew something sacred had been shattered. Jungkook blinked, then slowly set the bottle down on the edge of the stage. "What?" "I saw it. From the training footage. You were a kid. He slapped you." Jimin's voice cracked mid-sentence, and he quickly looked away, rubbing his eyes as if that would erase the image burned into them. Jungkook didn't respond immediately. The usual lightness in his posture faded. He stood still, like a shadow had wrapped itself around him. "Not everything back then deserves to be remembered," Jungkook said quietly. But Jimin stepped closer. "That's not fair. You were alone. You were just trying to be good. Why didn't anyone stop him? Why didn't I see it?" Jungkook let out a small laugh, dry and humorless. "Because I made sure no one would. It was easier to pretend I was just tired, or sick, or pushing too hard." He sat down on the wooden floor, legs crossed, eyes down. "You know what the worst part is?" he whispered. "It didn't feel wrong. I thought I deserved it. For messing up choreography. For making him come all the way from Busan just to yell at me in front of strangers." Jimin crouched beside him, fists clenched. "I used to think my dad was strict," he said. "But he never laid a hand on me, never came into the studio yelling. And I complained about him when I forgot lunch money." Jungkook smiled faintly. "You still complain." Jimin let out a shaky laugh through the tears forming in his eyes. "Don't do that. Don't joke now." "I have to," Jungkook said. "Otherwise I won't know what to do with all of this." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The echoes of the slap from the video seemed to replay in the stillness. Then Jungkook said, "I haven't spoken to him in years. He stopped coming around after debut. Said he was proud, but I could hear it in his voice. He hated that he wasn't the one who made me. That they did." Jimin reached over and gripped Jungkook's wrist. Not too hard. Just enough to ground them both. "You don't owe him anything," he said. "And you don't have to carry that pain alone anymore." Jungkook looked at him, eyes glassy but dry. "Why does it hurt more now than it did then?" "Because you finally let someone see it," Jimin whispered. And that was when his tears finally came. Quiet, bitter, and honest. Not because of what happened, but because it had taken this long for the truth to come out. That night, The studio lights dimmed earlier than usual. The others had already left. Only Jimin remained, sitting in the exact spot Jungkook once stood, watching the same footage again and again. He reached for his phone, opened a blank note, and typed one sentence. To protect him now, I have to face what we all ignored back then. And he didn't stop watching until the sun rose. The moment Jungkook walked into the dorm kitchen the next morning, he knew someone had talked. The air was too quiet. Jin's gaze lingered a little too long as he stirred his coffee. Taehyung avoided eye contact entirely, scrolling his phone with forced nonchalance. Even Hobie, normally bouncing between cabinets, moved slower, more careful. Only Namjoon broke the tension. So, his voice cut through the silence like glass snapping under pressure. You want to tell us what that was yesterday? Jungkook stiffened, his grip tightening around the carton of milk he just pulled out of the fridge. What? You and Jimin. The shouting. The crying. Namjoon didn't raise his voice, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. We all heard it. Jungkook glanced toward the hallway, expecting Jimin to appear and save him. But the older man hadn't come back from the studio since last night. Of course he hadn't. I'm not a kid, Jungkook muttered. I don't need to explain myself. No one said you were, Jean said carefully. But something happened. Something big. And if it's going to affect rehearsals or performances, it won't. Then explain. Jungkook slammed the milk on the counter harder than necessary. I said it won't. The sound jolted Taehyung, who finally looked up. His voice was soft but sharp. We're not asking because we're your managers, Jungkook. We're asking because we're your brothers. Something cracked in Jungkook's chest. He wanted to scream. He wanted to disappear. Instead, he pulled the chair back and sat down, shoulders hunched, fists clenched under the table. Jimin found out, he said. About my dad. No one said a word. Just stillness. Heavy, suffocating. He saw training footage. One of the old videos. He saw him hit me. Jungkook laughed bitterly, eyes locked on the tabletop. And now he's crying like he's the one who got slapped. Jin's mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. Namjoon exchanged a glance with Hobie, who looked visibly shaken. Taehyung was the first to speak. I saw it too. Jungkook's head shot up. What? I didn't say anything. I never said anything. Taehyung whispered, voice raw. It was years ago. I walked in when it happened. I heard him yelling. You were shaking. But you just kept dancing like if you stopped, he'd do it again. Jungkook's jaw clenched. And you just left? Taehyung's silence was the answer. Jungkook stood up so fast the chair nearly toppled behind him. You left me. I didn't know what to do. You could have told someone. Anyone. You saw what he did and you left. Taehyung stood too now, eyes wild, panicked. I was 14, Jungkook. You think I knew how to handle that? I thought if I ignored it, it'd go away. And you never once thought maybe I needed someone to not ignore it? Jungkook's voice cracked, louder now, trembling with rage and betrayal. How many times have I sat with you through your meltdowns? Your anxiety? Your fights with your family? And when it was me, you... Enough. Namjoon's voice was a whip. Both of you. But it was too late. The fire had already started. Jungkook stormed out, brushing past Hobie, who looked like he was about to cry. The youngest member's footsteps echoed down the hallway as a door slammed shut seconds later. In the aftermath, silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that screamed. Jean leaned on the counter, rubbing his temples. What the hell is happening to us? Meanwhile, Jimin hadn't returned to the dorm at all. He had walked until his legs ached, ending up in front of the one place he never thought he'd go. A modest apartment in Mapogu. The name on the doorbell was still there. Jeon. He stared at it for a full minute, chest tightening. Then he pressed the button. Took 3 rings before the door opened. The man standing before him was older than Jimin remembered, but only slightly. Graying at the temples, still tall, still with that same coldness in his eyes that sent a chill through Jimin's spine. Park Jimin, the man said with surprise. You look just like the kid Jungkook used to talk about. I need to talk to you, Jimin said, voice sharp. About what you did. Mr. Jeon raised a brow, then stepped aside without a word. Jimin entered slowly, trying not to gag at the faint scent of soju and dust. The living room was cluttered, dark, lined with outdated photos of Jungkook in his teenage years. None recent, none signed, none framed with care. Just static reminders of a son who had left and never looked back. So, the man said as he poured himself a drink without offering Jimin one. You're here to scold me like some self-righteous brat? No, Jimin said. I'm here to understand how someone can raise a boy like Jungkook and still treat him like garbage. Mr. Jeon chuckled. You know what the problem is with you kids? You think love means letting someone win all the time. I gave that boy a spine. You gave him trauma. The man's face darkened. He was soft, Mr. Jeon snapped. Always crying. Always afraid of failure. I had to make him strong. Jimin took a step forward, fists at his side. You hit him. You humiliated him. In front of strangers. And you call that strength? Mr. Jeon sneered. He never told you, huh? He begged me to keep visiting. Because he didn't want to be alone. Because he thought without me he'd break. And maybe he was right. Jimin's face twisted. That's not love. That's control. There was a long pause. Then Mr. Jeon looked him in the eyes and said, You think you know him? You don't. You know what he became. I know what he was. Jimin didn't reply. He just walked out. He didn't slam the door, he didn't need to. The man wasn't worth that kind of closure. Back at HYBE, Jungkook was pacing in the recording booth, alone, punching out angry lyrics that would never make it to an album. His fists clenched, his voice hoarse. Suddenly, the door opened. He turned, expecting Namjoon or a manager. It was Jimin, and something in Jimin's face broke him all over again. Jungkook opened his mouth to speak, but Jimin raised a hand. I went to see him. Jungkook went still. I wanted to know what kind of man could hurt a boy like you and sleep at night. Jungkook's eyes welled up before he could stop them. Don't look at me like that. Like I'm broken. You're not, Jimin said. But he is. Silence. Then Jimin added, softly. You never told anyone because you thought if you stayed quiet, no one would leave you. Jungkook blinked, startled. Jimin walked forward, voice shaking. But I'm not leaving. Not now. Not after knowing. There were no tears this time. Just exhaustion, acceptance, and a kind of peace that only comes after years of silence are finally shattered. And for the first time since they met, Jungkook didn't feel like the youngest. He just felt seen. Jungkook didn't come to the rehearsal the next day, and neither did Jimin. Rumors started before the staff even showed up. Camera operators whispered by the lighting rigs. One assistant swore she saw Taehyung storm out of the dorm late last night, hoodie up, barefoot, muttering to himself. Jeon hadn't smiled since breakfast, and Namjoon had started replying to every question with, We'll address it later. But the real storm wasn't in the studio. It was online. Around noon, an anonymous account posted a grainy screenshot from an unreleased BTS documentary. One that had never been meant for public eyes. It showed a teenage Jungkook, slouched in a studio corner, lip trembling, a man towering over him with a raised hand blurred mid-motion. The timestamp dated it 10 years ago. The watermark in the corner? HYB Internal Archive. Some demanded the agency explain why a child was left unprotected. Others lashed out. At the staff, at the trainers, even at the other members. One viral tweet accused BTS of knowing and staying silent. Then came the bombshell. A second video dropped, this time clear, edited, and cruelly captioned. It was taken from backstage during their first tour. Jungkook was 17, breathing hard after a dance break. His father, his voice unmistakable now, was recorded yelling over the phone on speaker. You still can't get it right. Maybe you're just not as talented as they said. The silence that followed was worse than the yelling. Fans around the world heard it, and they didn't forgive it. At the dorm, Jungkook sat in front of the TV, volume muted, as news anchors began speculating about his troubled past. He hadn't moved in over an hour. The room was dim. The curtains were drawn. Every phone in the house buzzed nonstop. Even the staff didn't dare knock on the door. Taehyung was the first to break the silence. He walked in barefoot, holding a piece of paper. No words. Just sat beside Jungkook and unfolded it. A printed copy of the tweet. Jungkook didn't look at it. So it's out. Taehyung nodded. It's out. Neither said anything for a long while. Then Jungkook whispered, "Do you think people will hate me?" Taehyung turned, shocked. What? For being weak. For not saying anything all these years. For letting it get filmed. For making it real. You didn't make anything happen, Taehyung said sharply. He did. But I let it define me. Taehyung didn't respond. Instead, he took out his phone and opened a recording. He pressed play. Jungkook heard his own voice. From years ago. I'm fine. I can do it again. I just need one more shot. A younger version of himself. Tired. Breathless. Trying to be perfect. That's what you sounded like when you were trying to survive, Taehyung said. Not weak. Just desperate. Jungkook stared at him. Why do you have that clip? Because I needed a reminder, Taehyung said, voice rough, of how much it cost you to smile on stage. Jungkook turned his face away, ashamed. But the conversation wasn't over. Not even close. At that same hour, in a conference room at HYBE, a war was unfolding. Bang Si-hyuk slammed his hand on the table. Who leaked it? No one answered. 12 staffers sat frozen. PR managers, documentary editors, legal counsel. No one dared move. The footage was locked, Bang continued. It was sealed. Internal archive. So someone, in this building, broke that chain. The lead documentary editor finally spoke. It wasn't us. We submitted the raw footage, yes, but the only ones who had final cut were you, Namjoon, and the content director. Bang's eyes narrowed. Are you accusing Namjoon? No, sir, the editor said quickly. I'm saying it wasn't leaked by production. The content director, a woman in her early 30s, adjusted her glasses. There's another possibility, she said slowly. The system was accessed remotely. Bang paused. By who? She hesitated. Then whispered, Jimin. Gasps rippled through the room. Bang's jaw tensed. Why would he? He had the password, she said. He asked for it last week, said he wanted to watch older training footage for a project. I thought it was official. But if he screen recorded. No, Bang said firmly. Jimin would never expose Jungkook. But someone else might have gotten his device, she said carefully. Everyone suddenly looked at the intern sitting near the door. A college student on her third week. Pale. Trembling. I saw him watching the footage, she said quietly. He was crying. He left his iPad on the bench outside the studio. I didn't mean to. Bang stood so fast his chair scraped loudly. Find out everything. Now. Back at the dorm, Jimin sat alone on the rooftop. The wind was sharp. Seoul looked endless from above. He had no idea what was happening online. His phone was still at the studio, forgotten in a haze of guilt and exhaustion. He thought he had protected Jungkook by confronting the truth. He had no idea the truth had already gone viral. He was replaying the conversation with Mr. Jeon in his head, over and over. You think you know him? You don't. Jimin clenched his jaw. He did know Jungkook. He knew how the youngest would apologize when he didn't need to, how he'd overpractice until his voice cracked, how he couldn't take compliments without deflecting, how he flinched when someone raised their voice even in laughter. Those weren't just habits. They were scars. And Jimin would rather the world burn than let Jungkook carry those alone. At 9 p.m., Jungkook's name hit #1 on global trends. At 10 p.m., Mr. Jeon went live on a small regional TV station, defending himself. People are exaggerating, he said. I was just trying to push my son to greatness. He's soft now because of all this pampering. He's acting like a victim for attention. That's when the fandom snapped. They posted clips, interviews, behind-the-scenes moments. Every time Jungkook said, "I'm okay," with that tired smile, ARMY turned the hashtag into a shield. Hashtag you were never weak JK. It trended in 64 countries within an hour. And somewhere in the chaos, Namjoon made a decision that would change everything. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Get me Jeon Jiamsu's ex-wife," he said. "It's time someone who really knows the truth speaks up." Because what the public didn't know, what Jungkook himself didn't know, was that the worst secret hadn't even come out yet. And it wasn't about the slap. It was about why Mr. Jeon had shown up at HYB that day in the first place. And who sent him? You said. Lanjutkan episode SE. The call lasted 37 seconds. That's all Namjoon needed. He didn't even sit down afterward. He stood by the dorm window, watching raindrops slide down the glass as the line went dead, heart pounding not with fear, but with fury. He hadn't told the others yet. Not even Jimin. Not even Jungkook. Because what he had just learned wasn't just scandalous. It was damning. Mr. Jeon's sudden reappearance at HYB all those years ago, the infamous day Jungkook was slapped on camera, wasn't because he was checking on his son, as the man had claimed for years. It was because someone in the building had invited him. Someone from HYB had made the call. And that someone was a name Namjoon knew too well. That evening, the group was summoned for an emergency closed-door meeting at HQ. No staff, no managers, just the 7 of them and Bang Si-hyuk. The air in the conference room was thick with unease. Jimin had only just found out about the leaked footage. Jungkook hadn't spoken since the news interview. Taehyung looked like he hadn't slept. Only Namjoon sat still, his jaw clenched, eyes forward. Bang Si-hyuk started first. "We're doing damage control," he said, flipping through a printed media report. "The public is on Jungkook's side for now. But the footage going public has raised questions about trainee welfare, supervision, and HYBE's internal policies." Jimin looked down at the table, ashamed. "I never intended." "I know," Bang interrupted. "We've confirmed your iPad was accessed externally. This wasn't your fault, Jimin." "But," he sighed, "there's something else." Namjoon leaned forward. "I found out who brought Jungkook's father into the building." Every pair of eyes in the room turned to him. It wasn't a coincidence. That visit was prearranged. Not by the agency. Not by Bang PD. By a former vocal trainer named Kang Hyun-woo. Jungkook's head snapped up. That name. That goddamn name. The man who used to scold him for breathing too loudly during pitch drills. Who once told him his falsetto sounded like a cat being strangled. Who never missed a chance to remind Jungkook he was only here because he was marketable, not talented. "He called my father?" Jungkook whispered. Namjoon nodded. "He said you were getting soft, that you were responding better to praise than pressure. He thought a visit from your real authority would whip you back into line." Jungkook laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was sharp, hollow, dangerous. "So that's what I was," he said. "An experiment. Project. Something they could test methods on." Jean leaned in. "Why are we only hearing about this now?" "Because Kang left before debut," Bang said. "He wasn't part of the company anymore when BTS blew up. He's been working with small agencies since. Quiet. Low profile." "He's the one who leaked the footage," Namjoon said flatly. "We traced the IP back to his current studio. He accessed Jimin's iPad while it was unlocked, downloaded the screen recording, and sent it to the press anonymously." Jimin's jaw dropped. "But why?" "Jealousy. Bitterness. Take your pick," Namjoon said. "He wanted to stir chaos. And he knew exactly how to do it." Jungkook stood up. "I want to see him." Everyone turned. "Absolutely not," Bang said quickly. "It's a legal matter now. Our lawyers." "I'm not asking to fight him," Jungkook said, his voice ice. "I want to look at the man who thought hurting me would make me better." The room went still. Jimin spoke quietly. "What would that change?" "Maybe nothing," Jungkook said. "But maybe it would finally make me feel like I'm not the scared kid in that room anymore." Later that night, Against the company's advice, Jungkook slipped out. No disguise, no staff escort, just a black hoodie and a destination. A shabby recording studio on the outskirts of Seoul. The kind of place that smelled like burnt instant noodles and moldy carpet. He knocked once. The door opened and there he was. Kang Hyun-woo. Older, thinner, but the same sneer curled on his lips. Well, look who made it big. Jungkook didn't reply. He walked in, shut the door behind him. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Jungkook said coldly. 10 years. Just hoping I'd break down so you could say you were right. Kang shrugged. And? Didn't I make you? No, Jungkook snapped. You tried to break me, but you didn't make me. They made me. My members. My fans. My pain. Kang leaned back, sipping from a paper cup. You think you're some kind of symbol now? Please. I watched you cry in that studio like a little brat. You were soft. Still are. Jungkook stepped forward. His voice didn't rise, but it cut deeper than any shout. Then why are you the one in a basement, hiding behind leaked footage? Kang's smirk faded. I'm not scared of you, Jungkook said. I'm done being scared of anyone. He pulled out his phone. And now you're going to apologize. On camera. Like hell I will. If you don't, Jungkook said. I released the footage of you throwing a chair at a trainee in 2013. Yeah. We have that too. Kang froze. In the end, the apology was pathetic. Mumbled. Forced. But it existed. It was posted. And it went viral in hours. Back at the dorm, Jungkook returned to find Jimin waiting outside his door. He didn't speak. He just opened his arms. And Jungkook fell into them. No words. Just breath and warmth and history. That night, they didn't speak about the past. They just sat side by side, on the floor, while the world watched a former tyrant shrink on screen. And for the first time since the story broke, Jungkook finally slept. The next morning began with blood on the sidewalk. Not literal blood, but the kind of metaphorical wreckage that only comes when a man is exposed for who he truly is, and the world finally believes it. The trending tab was on fire. Hashtag Jungkook deserved better. Hashtag Kang Hyun-woo out. Hashtag BTS protect their own. And somewhere down the list, another tag began rising. Hashtag where was HYB? Jungkook's retaliation had sparked a wildfire. The apology video had over 11 million views in 12 hours. News outlets dissected every frame. Media analysts praised Jungkook's composure, his iconic takedown, and his quiet strength. But the narrative was changing. It was no longer about a trainer gone rogue. It was about a system that let it happen. And HYBE, for all its polish and professionalism, had no answer for that. Until someone decided to speak. At precisely 11:07 a.m., a new video dropped on a burner YouTube account. It was shaky, filmed in secret, audio slightly muffled. But the woman on screen was unmistakable. Mrs. Jeon In-suk, Jungkook's estranged mother. She sat on a simple couch, holding a single photo. A smiling, chubby-cheeked child version of Jungkook, probably 6 or 7, before stardom stole his innocence. I never thought I'd do this, she said quietly. But I can't stay silent anymore. The internet froze. Jimin, still in the dorm kitchen, dropped his glass. Taehyung gasped mid-bite. Namjoon nearly cursed out loud. Jungkook? He stared at the screen like he'd seen a ghost. My son was taken from me long before he joined BTS, she began. Not physically, emotionally. His father was not just controlling, he was violent. Not just to Jungkook. To me too. I left when Jungkook was 12 because I thought it would protect him. I thought, if I stayed away, he'd be safer with his father's approval than caught between our war. She paused. I was wrong. And then came the bombshell. That day he was slapped at HYB. It wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't just a trainer's call. I have proof that Jungkook's father was invited by a senior agency official. Not just to push him, but to blackmail me. The camera zoomed slightly. She held up an envelope, stamped with an old HYB logo. They wanted me to stay out of his life. Said I was a distraction. Said, The boy has too many emotions, too many feminine instincts. He needs masculine structure. Gasps broke out online. Jungkook sat frozen, jaw slack. My son's trauma wasn't just from my husband. It was from a system that chose his pain over his peace. Because they believed suffering made better stars. And then she said the words no one expected. I'm ready to testify. The fallout was immediate. HYB's PR team scrambled. 3 staff members were suspended. Old tweets resurfaced from former trainees corroborating her story. Boys who had quit the program, saying they'd seen kids screamed at, pushed, even slapped off camera. The fandom exploded. The industry panicked. And inside the dorm, BTS sat in stunned silence. Did you know? Jungkook finally asked Namjoon. His voice so quiet it was almost broken. Did you know they threatened her? No, Namjoon said instantly. I swear, none of us did. Because it sounds like the company I gave my life to decided my mother was dangerous. She wasn't, Jimin said quickly. She isn't. They were scared. Scared of a mother who actually loved you. Jungkook let out a bitter breath. And instead, they gave me to a man who only knew how to hit. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the clip again. His mother's voice shaking as she confessed everything. Her shame, her silence, her helplessness. Taehyung placed a hand on Jungkook's shoulder. Hyung, Jungkook whispered. I don't know how to forgive her, but I miss her. You don't have to forgive her yet, Taehyung replied. Just don't close the door again. Later that night, the dorm's front gate buzzed. It wasn't a delivery or press. It was her, Jeon In-suk. She stood alone, no makeup, hair tied back, clutching that same childhood photo. Jungkook didn't move. Jimin, beside him, whispered, She's not asking for anything. She just wants you to see her. He moved toward the intercom slowly, pressed the button. The gate clicked. She didn't run. She walked, slow and steady, up the steps, past the garden, into the warm light of the foyer. When she stepped inside, her eyes found Jungkook's. I'm sorry, she said. He didn't reply. I thought disappearing was love. I didn't know staying away would leave you unprotected. Still silence. Until Jungkook said, softly, Why didn't you come when I debuted? She smiled sadly. Because I saw your smile. And I thought you didn't need me anymore. I needed you, he said. Her eyes filled with tears. I still do. And then, for the first time in over a decade, she stepped forward and embraced him. Not like a mother trying to fix the past, but like a mother trying to begin again. By midnight, the fandom had renamed the trending tag. #he was loved all along. But inside the dorm, the real shift had only just begun. Because now the members weren't just protecting Jungkook. They were questioning everything they'd ever accepted. The system, the silence, the rules. And somewhere deep in the HYB executive offices, Bang Si-hyuk knew. This wasn't just a scandal anymore. This was a reckoning. It started with a closed-door meeting that wasn't supposed to happen. 2 days after Jungkook's mother went public, HYB's executive board gathered in an emergency session. No press, no public agenda, no recordings allowed. The windows were blacked out. Security doubled. Even the internal janitorial staff was temporarily suspended. But someone leaked the minutes. An anonymous staffer uploaded the full transcript to a private forum, and within hours it made its way to the press. And when armies translated it, line by damning line, the firestorm reignited, hotter than ever. Excerpt from leaked transcript. Board Member A. We need to release a controlled statement acknowledging the incident, but focus on future growth and healing. Board Member B. No. We bury this. The mother's testimony will lose traction. Time is our ally. Bang Si-hyuk. And what about Jungkook? Board Member C. He'll recover. The fans always forgive idols. They don't forgive mothers. The world exploded. #Protect Jungkook evolved into #dismantle HYBE overnight. It was no longer about sympathy. It was rage, protest, a global movement. Outside HYB's main office, Fans started gathering. At first, dozens. Then hundreds. By dusk, thousands. Holding signs. Singing "Still With You." Holding candles and banners with quotes from Jungkook's lyrics about survival, pain, and silent strength. They weren't just fighting for him. They were fighting with him. Inside the dorm, the tension cracked like lightning. "Did you read what they said about your mom?" Taehyung asked, voice trembling with fury as he slammed his phone down. Jungkook didn't answer. "Fans forgive idols but not mothers?" Taehyung spat. "What kind of demonic garbage is that?" "Corporate logic," Jeon muttered. "Cold, clean, and cruel." Namjoon stood near the window, his jaw tight. "They're not going to back down. They're betting on us staying silent." "Then they're betting wrong," Jimin said darkly. All eyes turned to him. He sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop in front of him, open to a document titled, BTS Collective Statement, Draft 1. "You're writing a statement?" Jungkook asked. "No," Jimin said. "We are. All of us. And we're going to release it publicly together." Namjoon hesitated. "You realize what that means?" "I do. If we publish this without the company's approval, they'll threaten to sue," Jeon finished grimly. "They might terminate contracts," Hoseok added. "Block future projects. They might even try to replace us," Taehyung said with a bitter smile. But Jungkook just looked at Jimin, his eyes steady. "And you're still willing?" "I was willing the second I saw you lie on the floor at 16, bruised, and smile like nothing happened," Jimin said. "I just didn't know what to do back then. But I do now." Jungkook's throat tightened, and he nodded. "Then let's burn it down." The statement. At exactly 7 p.m. Korea Standard Time the next day, BTS went live on their official channel. No filters, no music, no branding. Just the 7 of them sitting together in the practice room that had once witnessed their rise, and their silence. Namjoon began. "We've always believed in love, in hope, in resilience." Jeon followed. "But we cannot stay silent when that belief is weaponized to excuse harm." Taehyung's voice was cold. "A system that protects abusers while silencing victims is not a system we will serve." Then Jungkook. "When I was 14, I was told pain would make me stronger. That silence was professionalism. That fear was discipline." He took a breath. "It was a lie." The screen flickered with a brief pause. Jimin leaned forward. "And we say this not just for Jungkook, but for every trainee, every idol, every artist whose silence has been stolen for the sake of image. This industry was not built to protect us. It was built to profit from us. That ends now." Hoseok nodded. "We demand full transparency on past trainee abuse." Jeon continued. "We demand independent oversight on artist mental health." Namjoon closed it. "And we demand an apology, not just to Jungkook, but to his mother, and to every family ever blamed for protecting their own." The feed cut to black. And armies lost their minds. HYB's stock plummeted by 11% overnight. The CEO called an emergency press conference, but canceled last minute due to health reasons. Meanwhile, artists under the label began posting cryptic stories and tweets. Broken hearts, candles, black screen emojis. Trainees from other agencies began submitting anonymous testimonials online, confirming abusive practices across the industry. The dam had broken, and the flood was coming. But the real shock came 3 days later, when a private investigator hired by Jungkook's mother released a scan document dated 2014. It was a signed agreement between HYBE and Mr. Jeon Jiamsu, outlining parental compliance conditions during Jungkook's minor contract years. In plain text, it listed terms such as maintain physical discipline only in off-camera scenarios. Parental input supersedes trainee agency until debut. Emotional correction approved under supervision of training lead. It wasn't just negligence. It was policy. Jungkook stared at the screen in horror. "I was property," Namjoon whispered. "We all were." And Jimin, his voice shaking with fury, stood up. "No more statements. No more reactions. We call a press conference." The next day, the nation held its breath. Live cameras rolled. The room was packed. And for the first time in K-pop history, the biggest band in the world stood behind a podium, not to promote an album or a tour, but to declare war on the very machine that built them. The camera lights felt different this time. They weren't warm. They weren't flattering. They weren't controlled by a marketing team in a temperature-regulated studio with cue cards and countdowns. This was live, raw, unscripted, unforgiving. BTS stood shoulder to shoulder on the stage of a rented civic center in Gangnam, Seoul. The backdrop was deliberately blank. No logos, no banners, no lights. Just a single sentence projected behind them in stark white text. The industry is built on silence. We choose to break it. A hush settled over the room as the press flooded in. Cameras, microphones, reporters from every major network in Korea, CNN, BBC, NHK, Al Jazeera. Every livestream link was breaking record counts. The hashtag #BTSLivePress trended globally before a single word was spoken. Jungkook stepped forward. His hands were steady. His voice, firm. I was 14 when I first learned that my pain was not mine to own. He let that hang. I was told that bruises were part of the process. That tears were weakness. That speaking up was betrayal. Reporters leaned in. Pens froze midair. He continued. I stayed silent for 10 years. Not because I forgave it, but because I thought it was the only way to stay. Jimin walked up beside him. But we're not here to stay anymore. We're here to stand. Jeon joined them, gaze piercing. Stand for every trainee who was screamed at until they couldn't sleep. For every idol told that collapsing on stage meant they weren't trying hard enough. Taehyung's voice was gravel. For every parent silenced. For every contract signed with shaking hands and no way out. Then Namjoon, calm as thunder. For years, this industry asked for our trust. And we gave it. Every night, every show, every tear wiped off stage before the curtain rose again. But now we ask you, the media, the fans, the world, to listen not to our music but to our truth. The room buzzed with the quiet hum of rage and reverence. Then Hoseok took the mic. And he said the words no one expected. We're suing HYBE. Silence. Then gasps. Then chaos. Reporters shouted over one another. Did you say suing the company? All of you. On what grounds? Namjoon lifted a document. Bold header. Intent to pursue class action on artist rights violations and psychological abuse. We are filing a class action lawsuit not just on behalf of BTS, he said, voice calm but electric, but on behalf of any artist who has been abused under the guise of development. Jimin added, we invite others, trainees, idols, producers, staff to come forward. We'll provide legal support. We'll make sure you're heard. Jungkook looked straight into the main camera. And if you're scared, I get it. I was scared too. But you're not alone anymore. The press conference shattered the internet. HYBE released a statement an hour later. We are shocked and disappointed. We believe the allegations are misrepresented. It didn't work. Thousands of comments flooded their social channels, drowning their PR spin. Jungkook doesn't lie. If he broke, we broke with him. BTS gave us their truth. Now we give them our voice. Even brand sponsors began pulling out. Not in defiance, but in solidarity. Luxury conglomerates offered public support. UNICEF issued a statement praising their bravery. Idol groups under other labels tweeted cryptic emojis. Chains breaking, mouths opening, eyes widening. The ripple was now a tsunami. But HYBE wasn't done fighting. 3 days later, at 2:13 a.m., a series of confidential files were leaked to the press by an anonymous source inside HYBE. Photos, emails, voice memos. One in particular hit like a bomb. A recorded meeting from 2016 between Jungkook's father, 2 HYBE execs, and a manager. The voice of a higher-up saying, let him cry. It makes him relatable. And relatable boys sell. The backlash was nuclear. The line spread like venom. Let him cry. It became a chant. Protest cry. a symbol of what idols were reduced to. On the streets of Seoul, massive crowds gathered outside HYBE headquarters. Placards, megaphones, signs reading, "Let him sing, not suffer. You profited from his pain. Silence is a scar." Jungkook watched it all from the dorm balcony. Hoodie pulled over his head, expression unreadable. Jimin came out and stood beside him. "It's bigger than us now," Jimin whispered. Jungkook didn't speak for a long time. Then softly, "Good." Back inside, Namjoon was on the phone with their legal team. Jean and Hobie were drafting witness lists. Taehyung was staring at a mirror, trying to remember the face he used to have before he learned to smile on cue. But then something happened that none of them expected. An email arrived. From jong@hybe.co.kr. Subject: Resignation letter. Bang Si-hyuk. It was just one line. "I will speak publicly, and I will tell the truth." At that moment the entire group froze. Not out of relief, but dread. Because if Bang PD, the man who built them, raised them in his own way, named them, was ready to speak, that meant the truth was even worse than they thought. And once it came out, nothing would ever be the same again. The broadcast was set for 9 p.m. Global networks scrambled to translate live. CNN, BBC, and MBC preempted programming. YouTube's homepage auto-featured it in over 20 countries. The entire K-pop industry held its breath. Not because they were curious about what Bang Si-hyuk would say, but because they already knew. And they were terrified of how far he'd go. The studio was plain. No branding. No makeup crew. Just Bang Si-hyuk, sitting alone in a chair, staring directly into the lens. The once revered hitman Bang, the man behind the BTS phenomenon, looked nothing like the mogul he had been. His face was pale. His eyes bloodshot. His lips pressed thin with exhaustion or regret. No one could tell. He began without greeting. "I want to confess." Across Seoul, inside BTS's dorm, 7 men watched the screen in silence. Jungkook sat on the floor, elbows on knees, fists tight. Jimin had his arms crossed, biting the skin on his thumb. Jean stood, pacing. Taehyung didn't blink. Hoseok's hand trembled slightly. Namjoon leaned forward, jaw rigid, preparing himself to hate what he was about to hear. Bang's voice was hoarse. "I was the one who authorized the parental compliance agreement in 2014. Jungkook inhaled sharply. "I allowed that language to be written, language that essentially reduced a child, Jungkook, to a product that could be managed through pain." He looked straight into the camera now. "I knew his father was violent. I knew the rumors. I didn't care. I thought a boy broken by home would be easier to control in a studio." Jimin blinked in disbelief. "He knew." Bang continued. "I told myself I was creating legends. I convinced myself that if they survived it, they'd be stronger for it. That I was shaping diamonds under pressure. But I wasn't shaping anything. I was compacting trauma." There was a beat. Then he dropped the real bomb. "I also knew who leaked the training footage to the press last week. And it wasn't a rogue intern. It wasn't an old trainer." He held up a file. "It was a strategic leak, authorized by HYBE's internal risk team, to destroy Jungkook's public image before the lawsuit could gain traction. They thought the public would turn on him. That fans would see him as emotional, unstable, and therefore less credible." The room inside the dorm erupted. Jungkook stood up so fast the coffee table shook.